Good morning, Brew Daily show. I'm Neal Freyman.
And I'm Toby Howell.
Today, how the internet became enshittified.
Neal, that's actually not a curse word. It's the brainchild of today's guest, Cory Doctorow. It's Wednesday, December 24th. Let's ride.
Merry Christmas Eve, everyone. For our final podcast before you unwrap your presents, we're bringing you a chat with someone who will change the way you think about the internet. Cory Doctorow is a prolific author and internet scholar who coined the term enshittification to describe the decay you experience every day on platforms like Amazon, Facebook, and Google. He has just come out with a book that explains how and why enshittification happens and what can possibly be done about it.
Now, forewarning, you're going to hear a lot of words that are reminiscent of bowel movements, but as Cory will explain, it's the perfect word for describing what everyone on the internet feels right now, which is things just feel a little bit worse these days. But first, a word from our sponsor, Public. Neal, I gotta tell you something.
I know you're the one who ate the rest of my bagel out of the fridge.
For the last time, that wasn't me. What I wanted to tell you was about Public. You know how on Public you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, and crypto? But now they have generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI.
Okay, that is legitimately cool. So with generated assets, you can create investable indexes, kind of like ETFs, but they are your own ideas.
Yes, sir. Completely customizable. You can type in any prompt like AI-powered supply chain companies with positive free cash flow or defense tech companies growing revenue 25% year over year. It screens thousands of stocks and will build you a one-of-a-kind index that you can then invest in with just a few clicks.
Get started at public.com/morningbrew and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/morningbrew. Paid for by Public Investing. Full disclosures in podcast description. Now, here's Cory.
Cory, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
All right, so the first question I had after I read your wonderful book is, how the heck did you come up with this term? Were you sitting on the toilet one day and you thought, brain blast, there is something here?
No, it's both less exciting and sort of more contingent than that. So I work for a nonprofit called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're sort of the leading digital rights group in the world, and I've been there for 25 years. And getting people to care about digital rights, it's hard, right? Because you're asking them to care about things that are abstract and far in the future and technical. You know, you can't just like wait until their lives have been destroyed by technology and then they'll care about it. But you'd ideally like to raise the salience while there's still time to do something about it, right? So I have just spent a couple of decades coming up with words and concepts and framing devices and metaphors and similes and whatever. And in this case, I was on vacation with my family in Puerto Rico, and we had rented a little cabin in a cloud forest, and it was serviced improbably by microwave internet. And one of the reasons that's improbable is that if you know one thing about microwave internet, the one thing everyone knows is that it doesn't go through clouds. And I remind you, we were in a cloud forest. And so before we would drive down into town, which was a couple hours away, there are a couple little towns we could go, we try and look up on TripAdvisor which restaurant to go to, whether it was open, that kind of thing. And you'd load like 20 TripAdvisor tabs, and they just time out because there's like 75 trackers on TripAdvisor, and it would load about 40 of them and then just die. And the only thing in the window would be what's called the favicon. It's the little icon that goes in the tab, and it would just fill the whole screen, like a high-res vector image of the travel TripAdvisor logo. So I in a fit of pique, I tweeted, has anyone at TripAdvisor ever been on a trip? This is the most enshittified website I've ever used. And people did what you're doing. They kind of polite chuckle. And then, you know, a year later, I was thinking about this bigger critique of platform decay. And I was like, you know, I kind of got a laugh out of that word enshittification. Maybe I'll use that to describe this thing. But the reason that I think that story matters is it tells you that it's not merely the minor license to vulgarity, although I think that's important. People love cussing, but it's the combination of the technical critique and the minor license to vulgarity that was like the magic peanut butter and chocolate here, that if it were just the vulgarity, people would have just been using it for all the interim.
So you said you've been making up similes and metaphors and weird words to describe things for a long time. What were some of the other ones?
Oh, so there's this idea that's very critical to enshittification called adversarial interoperability.
Ooh,
And this is a technical term, and no one understands what it means unless you're already someone who understands what it means. And so we came up with this thing called competitive compatibility, or ComCom, which we thought would be fun to say. No one liked it. In the end, I didn't like it. But adversarial interoperability, it's super important. It's when you take a thing that the manufacturer has designed in a way that doesn't suit you, I probably in a way that like harms you at the manufacturer's benefit, like say a printer that can only take ink from the manufacturer, and you modify it, right? So that's making it so that it can use other people's ink. And so making it use other people's ink, that's interoperability. Doing so against the wishes of the manufacturer, it's adversarial. And like, it's a kind of a bedrock that like if you own a thing, you should decide how it works, even if that upsets the shareholders of the company that made it. If they're like so emotionally fragile that they can't bear to think that the people who buy their products will use them in ways that benefit them at the expense of the shareholders, then maybe they're in the wrong line of business, because it is yours and you should have the final say over it.
so let's flesh out this idea of enshittification, which you explore in your book. And you're telling enshittification doesn't happen immediately. It is a process. So if you could briefly walk us through this process of how something becomes enshittified. I'm still getting used to saying that.
Yes. It's got disenshittification, enshittification, enshittificatory, enshittigenic, disenshittificatory, and so on and so on. Enshittification has got three parts, right? One is like a description of how platforms go bad. One is a theory about why they're going bad, and one is a proposal for how to make them better. So the first part, this description of how platforms go bad, it's a three-stage process. And in stage one, platforms are good to their end users, but they're also trying to find a way to lock those end users in. And then once the users are locked in, they make things worse for those end users in stage two. And because the users are locked in, they know that they can turn the screw without risking those users' immediate departure. And so they make things worse for those end users in order to take something from them and give it to business customers who get lured in. That's stage two. In stage three, those business customers who've been locked in as well, because they're now dependent on those end users, they have all the value withdrawn from them as well. The platform harvests all the value from users, all the value from its business customers. It leaves behind kind of the barest kind of homeopathic residue of value needed to keep users locked to the platform, businesses locked to the users, and delivers all that value to themselves, to the shareholders and the executives.
So put it into concrete terms for someone who is just new to this
Sure.
term. You have a lot of case studies in your book. Walk us through step by step that happening at a big tech company.
Yeah, let's talk about Facebook. So 2006, Facebook goes beyond American college kids with a .edu address. They try to lure in people from the general public. Anyone who wants social media at that point already has an account on a rival service called MySpace. So Mark Zuckerberg makes a pitch to those users. Look, I know you love your friends that you hang out with on MySpace, but I don't know if you realize this. MySpace is owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent, immortal vampire billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, and he's spying on you with every hour that God sends. And like, no one should want to use social media that's owned by a billionaire, and you should especially not want to use social media that spies on you. So come use Facebook. I understand this is quite ironic in hindsight, but we pile into Facebook and we get locked in, and not through some of the more exotic tactics that other platforms use, like Uber, for example. They had this guy, Masayoshi Son, who's a venture capitalist, runs a firm called SoftBank, funnel $31 billion in Saudi royal money to Uber so that they could lose 41 cents on every dollar they brought in for 13 years until all the other cab companies had gone in business. We'd starve public transit investment and they could just like double the price of a fare. So that's like a very difficult, high stakes lock in strategy. With Facebook, we just lock ourselves in, and we lock ourselves in through a thing economists call the collective action problem, but you probably know as, you love your friends, but they're a pain in the ass. So, you got 6 people in your group chat, they're your best mates, but you can't even agree on like what bar you're going to go to on Friday, much less like when they and all the people that they are on Facebook for are all going to leave Facebook. So now that he knows that he can inflict some pain on you because you love your friends more than you hate him, he makes things worse for you. And we get to stage 2, where he brings in business customers. So one example would be advertisers. He goes to the advertisers and he says, do you remember we told these rubes we weren't going to spy on them? Obviously, that's a lie. We spy on them from with every hour that God sends, and you give us small amounts of money. We'll target ads to them with incredible fidelity. And we're such dedicated craftspeople that we're going to fund a whole building full of anti-fraud engineers, and they're going to do do nothing except try and block ad fraud. So when you give us $1 to show an ad to a kind of user, we're going to find that user and stuff the ad in their face. So advertisers pile in, publishers pile in. They're told, remember we told these suckers we weren't going to show them things they hadn't asked to see. We will show them your stuff if you put it on Facebook. Just put up an excerpt and a link and we'll cram it into their eyeballs. And so they pile in and they get locked into. It's very hard to leave once that user base is a significant part of your business. They become structurally important. And so now Facebook starts to turn the screws on them, and publishers find that they have to put longer and longer excerpts on the platform. Eventually, it's just the whole article. If you want to get shown to your own subscribers, much less recommended to a user who hasn't subscribed to you yet. And if you put a link back to your own website, they won't show it to anyone because that might be a, quote, malicious link. Advertisers see prices go way up. They see ad targeting fidelity go through the floor. Ad fraud explodes. When Procter & Gamble in 2017 zeroed out its surveillance advertising budget, with the platforms called programmatic advertising, they saw a 0% drop in sales because all $200 million was just disappearing down the fraud hole. So the publishers and advertisers are getting a bad beat, but so are we. The amount of stuff in our feed that we've asked to see has dwindled to almost nothing. And what's being filled in that void is stuff that people are being charged billions of dollars for that they're getting ripped off on too. And now you get to like this stage that they've been shooting for, right? This equilibrium where all the available value has been harvested, but it's very brittle, this equilibrium, because you get one live stream mass shooting or Cambridge Analytica scandal, people bolt for the exits, shareholders pound the company's stock, and the founders and the executives, they panic. Although being technical people, they have a technical term, they call it pivoting. And so Mark Zuckerberg arises from his sarcophagus one morning and says, hearken unto me, brothers and sisters, for I've had a vision. I know that I told you that your future would consist of arguing with your most racist uncle using this primitive text interface that I created to non-consensually rate the fuckability of Harvard undergraduates. However, in this vision, I have realized that the true future is one in which I transform you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character so that I can imprison you in a virtual world I stole from a 25-year-old dystopian cyberpunk satirical novel that I call the metaverse. And that's the final stage of enshittification. The platform is now a giant pile of shit.
Is enshittification quantifiable? Do you have some sort of empirical metric, or is it just an instinctual sense that this has gotten worse? Is there a way, if I just log into a random website and I look around and do I have this epiphany where oh, yep, this is definitely enshittified because I see X, Y, or Z?
So now you're getting into the theory part of it, right? Not the descriptive part, because obviously we didn't invent greed in the middle of the last decade. So something changed that caused these companies to start doing this extraction. And my theory is that what changed is that we have this, as I say, enshittigenic policy environment, that our policymakers took decisions in living memory after being warned about the consequences that had the outcome of making it so that when companies mistreat you or mistreat their suppliers or their business customers, that rather than losing in the market by having their profits decline, their workers depart, their customers jump ship, that they gain in the market, they do better. And so enshittification is not just when a platform goes bad. It's when a platform goes bad and does well. And so you could see two platforms, both of which were doing bad things to you. But I would argue that it's not really enshittifying unless they thrive as a consequence, right? If they fail as a consequence, well, that's just how the market works, right? I'm not the world's biggest believer in markets. I think markets are a useful tool, but I don't think they're the best way of organizing everything. But, I do understand that in the theory of markets, the idea is that when companies do bad, they do bad financially. And, this is a bedrock. Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations, he says, it's not through the beneficence of the baker that we get our bread. It's through his self-regard, right? The baker is motivated to give you a good loaf of bread because he knows that if he gives you a bad one, you'll buy your bread somewhere else and he'll go out of business. And so when you have that being short-circuited because of policies, and I want to stress here, these are not nebulous, a bad idea from a politician. These are very specific policies that had this very foreseeable outcome. When companies can take advantage of those policies to mistreat you and do well, then I'd say that that's enshittified. So it's not really about which of these symptoms they're showing. It's about what's happening when they exhibit these symptoms.
It's very interesting because I was finding it difficult to wrap my head around enshittification because I was thinking in terms of a restaurant owner who says, I'm going to start cutting costs by buying cheaper ingredients. How is that in the best interest? Yes, he will save money in the short term, but over the long term, you destroy your relationship with your customer. Hence, that's bad for the business. So how are companies sitting there thinking that this is the right move to do, is to provide a worse experience? That just doesn't seem like square the circle for me there. Why are they even doing this?
Well, so there are four things that discipline companies, this is the term economists use. Discipline is like when something bad happens to you because you've done something bad. And there are four forces that discipline companies historically, and we can see how they've all been eroded. So the first one, as you mentioned, is competition, right? It doesn't matter if you're the only restaurant in town and you serve a bad meal. If there's nowhere else to go, it kind of doesn't matter. People are still going to show up and eat there. I mean, we've all had this experience on the other side of the TSA checkpoint where you really do have effectively the only restaurant in town, right? And they know that you have nowhere else to go. This is that bit Lily Tomlin used to do on Saturday Night Live where she'd pretend to be a Bell operator, an AT&T operator. She'd do an ad for the Bell system and she would end it with, "We don't care. We don't have to. We're the phone company," right? So you understand how that would happen. Now, what happened to competition? It's not a mystery. So these economists, that we would call them neoliberal economists, they were the economists sort of associated with Reagan, but they really held sway for like 40 years. They had this radical theory of competition and monopoly, what in America we call antitrust, which is the law that tries to prevent monopolies and break them up when they occur. And they said monopolies are actually good. That when you see a monopoly in the world, when everyone's buying something from one company, what you should infer is that that company is really good at its job. And wouldn't it be perverse to punish that company for being so good that we all love it by attacking it using public resources? And so they said, just leave the monopolies be. And then, to, I guess, no one's surprise, unless you've had the specific neurological injury you can only get by doing an econ degree, we got monopolies, right? And like these guys, they insist that the two are not related, right? When we observe monopolies in the wild that are quite abusive, whether that's like the automotive sector or intermodal or sea freight shipping, or whether it's like the sterile bags full of saline or hospital beds or coffins. One company makes both all the hospital beds and all the coffins. How's that for a strange little combine? Or whether it's the 5 publishers, 4 studios, 3 labels, 2 ad tech companies, and 1 ebook company that dominate media. And we say to them, like, look at these harmful monopolies. Look at professional wrestling or cheerleading. And they say, well, how is that our fault? Right? It's like we used to not have a rat problem because we've been using rat poison. And these guys were like, stop putting down rat poison. And now rats are eating our faces off. And we go back to them and they say, that's not our fault. Like, it's sunspots that have ushered in the time of the rat, a moment in which rats are more fecund than at any time in human history. And I will stipulate the rats did buy all the poison factories and shut them down. But look, if we're not using rat poison, that's just economically rational, right? So they say, oh, it's the iron laws of economics. It's returns to scale. It's the great forces of history. So we got rid of competition. So they don't really worry about competitors. Mark Zuckerberg was able to buy Instagram. Google was able to buy everything, right? Take away Google's acquisitions. Like, this is a company that can't make a product in-house. Everything they make in-house dies. They've had one really successful consumer-facing product. It was in the previous millennium. It's a thing called search. Everything else they've made has basically tanked. And what they do is they bought a mobile stack, an ad tech stack, a maps and navigation stack, documents and collaboration, server management, you name it, right? They bought it from someone else and operationalized it. They're not Willy Wonka's idea factory. They're just like big rich Uncle Pennybags, right? They're just buying other people's ideas.
Yeah, is big inherently bad though? Because I'm sitting here as someone who uses Gmail, who uses Chrome, who uses Maps, all of it ostensibly for free, and there's billions of people out there like me. So is it the fact that Google owns it and is big that makes it bad? Or if a bunch of smaller companies did the same thing, would that be better?
So you're going straight into my next point. Thank you. So there's another force that disciplines companies, which is regulation. So you can think of competition as the discipline of the market, regulation as the discipline of the state. But they're really kind of the same thing, because if you allow companies to merge and merge and merge, and you create a cartel, the cartel does something called regulatory capture. And that's where the companies get the regulators to work for them instead of working for the public. And that's something that's only possible if you can solve, you remember the collective action problem? You and your friends can't agree on when to leave Facebook. Well, 200 companies can't agree on what they want their regulator to do, but 5 companies can, right? And these companies, they're so inbred, they've got Habsburg jaws, right? You have the same executives hopping from C-suite to C-suite to C-suite. They're all godparents to each other's children. They're executors of each other's estates. They're in the same polycules, and they just show up at regulatory fora with exactly the same story. And they have so much capital because they don't compete. They again, when you have a cartel, they can divide up the world like the Pope dividing up the new world, right? So Apple gets a $20 billion+ per year bribe every year from Google not to enter the search market, right? So they don't have to worry about eroding one another's margins by directly competing. So they have lots of money to spend on policy adventures. So we don't have to. So what that means is that if the companies use the power they have in the market to abuse you, we no longer have competitors who are acting as a check on their behavior. But we also don't have regulators. The regulators don't step in either. And so you get this combination where you could have a system that was integrated and worked from top to bottom and was quite seamless, right? And it's not necessary for firms to all be under one roof to do that, although it sometimes helps. But all the light bulbs in your house work, even though the light sockets and the light bulbs are all made by different people. Like standards are a thing, and we can do standards that allow stuff to work. It's very weird when you think about social media that like which network you're on matters as to who you can talk to. That is the most like prodigy CompuServe ass technology thing to arrive at that you can imagine. Like imagine if were like phones where you'd have to care whose SIM was in someone's phone before you could give them a call. That is a legitimately weird and primitive thing that we've arrived at here.
On the topic of Google paying Apple $20 billion a year to be the default search engine, there was this recent antitrust trial and remedy verdict that was passed down on Google search, which was deemed a monopoly. But the judge this past summer declined to wield heavy penalties against Google. It said you can still pay Apple and we're not going to hive off any of your business. And the judge cited specifically the rise of AI and chatbots and Anthropic and ChatGPT as true competitors to Google. So they ruled that this was actually now, it looked like a much more competitive landscape than 4 or 5 years ago when this trial began. So do you think that the rise of AI has led to a more competitive landscape in search?
Well, let me just refine that question in 2 ways. So first is Google didn't just lose one antitrust case last year; they lost 3. So they were convicted 3 times of having a monopoly. The other thing is that when the judge talked about Apple specifically, it wasn't because of AI. It was even weirder. He said Google bribes Apple with $20 billion a year every year. Where will Apple get the free cash flow to come up with cool iPhone features if I stop them from soliciting bribes from their most direct competitor? Right? That is like not a good judicial decision. And it's not surprising. We have 40 years of bad jurisprudence. And so when the judges look to the jurisprudence, when they look to the kind of the attitude of their their cohort, they don't see this kind of muscular action, and it's going to take a while. It took, like, after the passage of the Sherman Act, which is the first antitrust act in 1890, it took till 1912 to break up John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil. So it'd be amazing if we could just reverse that 40 years overnight. I don't think AI is a real competitor on search. I think that this is the kind of thinking that has dominated bad antitrust decisions over the last 4 decades. And we just saw it again in the Facebook case, where the judge dismissed the case against Facebook by saying that they had all these competitors in the form of TikTok and whatever other things that you could use your attention for. And as David Dine wrote in the American Prospect, this is like saying, well, ultimately, because you can sleep sometimes, there's always a competitor for your attention, right? And it's just wrong. It's just wrong on its face. So if the judge felt that the law was so constrained, and I don't think that's a good interpretation, but if the judge felt the law was so constrained that a company that was as obviously a monopolist as Google could not be convicted under the law, then that militates for legislative reform. But it still means that, it's what we got to do. Like all the best Americans, I'm Canadian. And in Newfoundland, there's this joke whose punchline is, if you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here. I think that is very much where we are right now. This is not the place we want to start from, but it is where we are.
Well, you have me getting a little bit nervous and thinking inwardly a little bit because, we have a product that we deliver to consumers. What words of warning would you give us as a show to avoid enshittifying ourselves?
Or is it too late already?
Well, no, I don't think it's too late. I think the first thing to understand is that if you think that the reason that the method by which you will prevent enshittification is your own kind of moral core, which is important but not sufficient, then you're quite dangerous, right? Then you are going to end up getting, because no one woke up in the morning and said, "How can I make things worse?" Right? They rationalized their way into it. They made all kinds of stepwise decisions where they then judged their next decision based on where they were now and not where they started. So they're like, "Well, like I've already done 10 bad things." Doing the 11th is just a small change from where I am now, but they don't say, well, it's 11 in total, right? And so if you want to prevent yourself from compromising, you have to make compromise harder for yourself in the future. In behavioral economics, we have this idea called the Ulysses Pact. So if you're familiar with the story of Ulysses, right, he wants to hear the song of the sirens, and anyone who hears the song jumps in the sea and is drowned by them. And his sailors have a protocol. They fill their ears with wax. But he's like, no, I want to hear the song. He's a hacker, right? He wants to eat his cake and have it too. So he wants to hear the song. So what he does is he ties himself to the mast so he can hear the song but not act on its compulsion. And a Ulysses Pact is anytime you take some course of action off the table now while you're strong in anticipation of your future weakness. So that might mean, for example, a distribution system that's open to all players. So not locking yourself into YouTube, having an RSS feed, not being behind Spotify's paywall or behind one of these other services paywall, which means that you're vulnerable to Spotify applying pressure to you. It might mean unionizing your workers. Because if you're the kind of person who can rationalize your way into saying, as I've seen so many people do, right, your VC shows up and says, you've got to make things bad for the business or bad for your users. And if you don't, I'm going to pull the plug and you're going to have to fire your workers. And you're like, well, I convinced all these people to come work for me. They're like betting their kids' college fund and their mortgage on it. I am a uniquely good guy. And so I can save all those jobs and live to fight another day. Well, if your workers are unionized, they can say, we're not going to do this bad thing to our users. You can structure as a B Corp. You can structure as a worker co-op. You can use open licenses for your material that are irrevocable. So even if you're a venture capitalist or you in the future decide to do something bad, you can't affect that retrospectively on your content archives. Those are all your possibilities, right? And I'm not saying they're easy, but they are simple. Right. And in the same way that like you can't trust anyone who says, well, I'll just not make mistakes. And that's how I'm going to, drive you home safely or run this business safely or run this country safely. I think you can't trust yourself if your only plan is, I'm not going to make any mistakes. Speaking as someone who's made a lot of terrible mistakes in his life, that is not a plan.
You can tie me to a pole anytime, Nick. It's fine.
And I have. I was curious, enshittification. Enshittification is a broad term, right? But you use it in the context of social media companies and internet companies. Do you find that it applies to other industries as well as some sort of relevant way of understanding what happens to other companies? Like has McDonald's enshittified itself? The NFL?
Sure. Yeah. So, in the other parts of the discipline story, there are parts that are distinct to tech, like the fact that we have this interoperability we talked about before, where you can kind of fix things that have shipped from the factory broken just by changing how they work. And it's much easier in a digital platform than it is in analog because, like, if I write the software that disenshittifies your printer, I can just like send you a copy. You don't have to do it. Whereas, like, if your KitchenAid mixer only takes KitchenAid's accessories and they're charging a fortune for them, I can't like machine a thing that allows you to put a Miele accessory in your KitchenAid and then like email you the file, right? I've got to ship you a physical thing at a bare minimum, right? Or you've got to find a machine shop or something. So software's got this like uniquely disenshittificatory aspect. It also had a workforce that was quite powerful and often really cared about users because they were scarce and very valuable. And so it was really hard for companies to disregard their input. Of course, now have lost that power, and they didn't unionize. The supplies caught up with demand. They've lost that power. In the same way that interoperability has gone away because IP law has expanded to basically ban most of that reverse engineering. So those are distinct to technology, right? Those are not characteristics of the NFL. They're not characteristics of McDonald's. But I am, on the one hand, totally fine with people using the word colloquially. I do have a kind of weird cohort of people who follow me around on the internet and scold people in my mentions who use enshittification loosely on my behalf. And I'm like at great pains to say, please stop doing that. The only way to maintain like a rigorous technical definition of this word would be to confine its use to a group of irrelevant insiders. I'd much rather 10 million normies use it loosely and then 1 million of them go read my book than have it just be like 10,000 people who agree with me entirely already. And the other thing that I would say, though, is that digitization is turning other sectors into tech sectors. So, like nurses, hospitals really like to hire them as contractors because they can do union avoidance when they hire contracted nurses. They used to contract them through staffing agencies, and there'd be a few in every big town. Now there's 4 national apps, and they all call themselves in their marketing materials Uber for nursing. And because of regulatory capture, we haven't had a new consumer privacy law out of Congress since 1988, when Ronald Reagan made it illegal for video store clerks to disclose your VHS rentals. Every other form of consumer privacy violation is legal federally. And so when the app offers the nurse the shift, there are data brokers who will sell the app the nurse's credit card history. And nurses who have more credit card debt and whose debt is more delinquent are paid a lower wage. It's a desperation premium. Think about that the next time you're having your catheter changed, right? And these nurses, they're not working in the tech sector, but they're working in a sector that has been digitized. Like the coal bosses in old Tennessee Ernie Ford songs would have happily done this to their coal miners. But like hiring all the Pinkertons to follow the miners around and figure out who's willing to accept a lower wage, and then hiring the guys in green eye shades to like change the ledger to mark down their pay packet was just not practical. So the digitization of nursing has made it possible to enshittify nursing, not in the loose colloquial sense of things getting worse because of greed and a lack of market discipline and regulation, but in the specific technical sense of taking advantage of the technical characteristics of platformization to victimize nurses by eroding their wages.
Okay, we're coming up on time here, so I want you to kind of finish the process for us. What is the solution for enshittification? What is the cure, as you put it in your book?
Yeah. So the thing that's going to disappoint you when I say this is that it's not a thing you can do as a person, right? You can't just like shop your way out of the monopoly. It's like trying to recycle your way out of a wildfire, right? These are not individual decisions. The reasons billionaires want you to vote with your wallet is their wallets are thicker than yours, and they're not very numerous as individuals. So the only kind of election they can win is the one where you vote with dollars instead of people. And so you're not going to like make your consumption choices change this. By all means, like make consumption choices that make you happy. Patronize your local bookstore instead of Amazon, or like get off Twitter and onto Mastodon or Blue Sky if that's what you prefer. But don't think that it's going to make a systemic change. If you want to make a systemic change, you have to be part of a movement that changes the policy environment, because it is the policy environment that gives rise to this. Elon Musk is not smart enough to be the cause. He's the effect, right? If Elon Musk overdoses on ketamine tonight, there'll be a succession battle of 12 horrible big balls, and whoever emerges victorious will be indistinguishable from Elon Musk. So we need to change the policy environment. And the way you do that is by getting involved with groups that work as a polity. So as I said, I work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org. You can visit that website and find out how to get involved with EFF's causes. But in your state, you will have local political organizations, mutual aid groups, labor groups, groups that are fighting concentrated corporate power and the corruption that creates the enshittigenic policy environment. That's where you got to start. And I know it's a big lift, but you're going to like it, because being part of a group is amazing. It means that instead of just like watching TikTok on a Saturday, you got a picnic to go to, or a thing where you're feeding the hungry people in your neighborhood, or just a party down at the Union Hall. And so it sounds like a big lift because we had a lobotomy 40 years ago when we were convinced that we were just individuals and not part of groups. But it feels so good to be part of a group, and you'll discover that too.
Now, someone who's hearing you talk for the first time or reading your book might get the impression that you are a Luddite, very anti-technology. And so I am curious, what is your relationship with technology? I mean, you've been a blogger for a very long time, an early adopter of the internet, working in the
Sure.
digital space for longer than
Yeah, yeah.
we've been alive. So I'm just curious at a personal level, like what is your view of technology?
Well, I was raised by a computer science teacher. I have an honorary doctorate in computer science. I worked as a programmer. Um, I have a computer tattooed on my right bicep from when I was 18, and I stick my face in my computer every moment I can, and I love it. And it's like how I made my most important social connections, and how I made my most important romantic and familial relations. I live very far from my family. It's how I stay in touch with them. So I'm not anti technology. So the other thing that I do in my life, and actually the thing I'm arguably better known for than this, is I write science fiction novels. I'm a multi best-selling science fiction novelist. And the thing about science fiction writers is that people think that we're prophets, right? That we're trying to think up new gadgets and describe what they do. But there is no such thing as prophecy. The world is contingent and up for grabs. What we do matters. We can change the future. What science fiction writers do is not predict the future, but try and imagine a different set of social relations for the technologies around us now, using futuristic parables. We're not so much interested in what the gadget does, but who it does it for and who it does it to. And I'm of the opinion that we could have friends on the internet without Mark Zuckerberg listening in on our conversations, and that we could have phones that worked without Tim Cook deciding which apps we can use and charging everyone who makes an app that we love 30 cents out of every dollar we spend. And then we could search the web without Satya Nadella or Sundar Pichai knowing what color underwear we're wearing, right? That we can like cleave off the parts that we don't like. We can take this disgusting pre-feast menu that's got 18 courses that even a dog wouldn't eat, and we can throw them away and make an a la carte offer where we just take the two things that we like and get rid of all the crap that tech bosses want us to like.
So as a science fiction writer, there might be a lot of people who read science fiction. This guy next to me is a big sci-fi guy. What, in your opinion, what is your favorite or what is the best fictional work about the impact of the internet? Can be a TV show
So I
or
got to
a
say,
book.
anyone who's got like a one favorite, it's always a little sketchy. Usually, the one favorite book is like the Bible or Atlas Shrugged or Mein Kampf. So I'm not like a one book guy. You can see behind me, I'm a many thousands of books guys. But if you want a very prescient book about the way we're relating to technology today, there's a wonderful old novel from, I believe, the early 90s by Bruce Sterling called Distraction, about high-tech networked politics in the age of kind of crazy performative politicians. And Bruce is just an incredible writer, but he is in this book like on fire. So Distraction by Bruce Sterling, and it's Sterling like sterling silver, Sterling. He's a great guy.
Pretty productive morning for us, Neal. I got a reading list. I got a lot to think about. So, Cory, thank you.
You got to restructure as an S corp, create a workers co-op, or a B corp rather, create a workers co-op.
Hit the picket line.
We have a
unionize
lot
your workforce. Hit the picket line. Yeah.
And
join EFF. Join EFF is the thing you should do first.
Read the Odyssey. Join EFF. Read
tie yourself to a pole.
Yeah, tie yourself. Get your friend to tie you up again.
Exactly. Join a group. Well, Cory, this was super fun. Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you.
Everyone, go check out his book, Enshittification: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. This was fun, Cory. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
The dirty secret is I work in my hammock when I'm not on camera, so I am supine for much of the day.
A little recharging action, going back and forth.
Hammocks in the office.
I have a bad back, and it's nice and comfortable. I can kind of anteriorize my pelvis. It's good.
Nice.